Hello, and welcome to episode 23 of Charlotte Mecklenburg History with Dan Morrill. Today is Sunday, August 23rd, 2020, and I am Dan's daughter, Mary Dana, here with Dan through Zoom. Hey, Dad.
Hello, everybody.
Right.
How are you?
And today we are talking about a few things. Okay, so Dad said he's going to start out with some corrections to a previous podcast, and then he's going to talk about that Griffin that is on that house on Crescent Avenue, right, Dad? Is that right?
Correct.
Crescent. And then he's going to begin his discussion of mid-century modern architecture in Charlotte. But this is going to be a multi-part topic. I can already tell because Dad on the title screen has part 1. So that means more parts are coming.
Be prepared.
You aren't even going to try to do it in one.
No.
Okay. So, all right, Dad. Well, you take it away.
Well, let me make a couple of corrections. You remember when we did the podcast on Myers Park, I said that the Wofford House, which was one of the first houses, was where the Ming tree was. That's not true. This is the former home of the Mecklenburg Furniture Company. If any of you ever eat at Fenwick's, this is right across Providence Road from Fenwick's. And that's where the Ming tree was. So I just wanted to correct that. You remember several sessions ago, we did a podcast on Noda.
Mm-hmm.
And I made the comment that the last mill to close was Highland Park number 3 in 1969. It did close in 1969. But the last mill to close, even though it was a bare whimper of its former self, was the Johnston Mill, which closed in 1975. So, wanted to get that right.
That's
I'm
right.
not perfect. I'm not perfect.
Are people letting you know on Facebook, sending you messages?
Yes, and I've done a little bit of research since. I definitely found that out about the Ming tree, and I found out about from someone else, and I definitely found out about the Johnston Mill from my own research. So anyway.
Well, thanks everybody for your feedback. We always appreciate hearing.
Oh, absolutely. It's so important for you good folks to let me know I'm not perfect.
And you can email him at danmorrill2@gmail.com.
Yes,
you want to
danmorrill2@gmail.com. That'll get me.
Okay.
Okay, let's talk about a mystery solved. This is a very interesting little tidbit. Years ago, somebody told me I needed to go look at this house, which is going to be torn down, by the way. In fact, the house is going to close very soon. I think maybe within the next 2 weeks. Somebody told me to go by and look at this house, and they said there's something strange up on that house. So I don't live very far from this house. It was about a 3-minute drive from my house to this house.
What's the address of this house?
You know, I don't know, Mary Dane. I can't remember. It's the first house on the right after you turn onto Crescent Avenue.
Off of Providence Road.
There's Providence. There it is.
The Griffin.
I'd click this to get rid of it, but I'm afraid that it'd do something goofy, so I'm not going to do it.
That's fine.
Now, I'm not sure this is a Griffin. Everybody calls it a Griffin, and I'm going to call it a Griffin. A Griffin is supposed to be real smart and real strong. And you put a Griffin at a place of importance. It's usually a guard. It keeps bad things away. Griffins are good. They have the head of an eagle and the body of a lion. Now, this is, when I saw this thing, I said, holy Toledo, what in the world is that? Where did it come from? You know, what's the story here? Well, I never could find out. I called people, asked people, the people who own the house. This was known as the Griffin house for a long time. It was some sort of a antique shop or store. It's more recently been known as Circa. Well, not only that, let me tell you the story. One thing leads to another. I gave a lecture last fall, early in the fall, at the Duke Mansion. And I showed this house and I showed that Griffin. And I had a woman contact me who's on the board of Preserve Mecklenburg, by the way. And she said, there's another Griffin. I said, there's another Griffin. She said, yes. And she said, in fact, I didn't know about your Griffin. And I said, well, I didn't know about your Griffin. And she said, when she saw me show this slide during my Duke lecture, she almost fell out of her seat because she was so excited. Well, here's the other Griffin. Now, it's not in quite as good shape as the Griffin on the house, but it's still there. You can see, of course, the head of an eagle, the body of a lion. And I can't go through all the story, but she and a friend were walking one day in the Elizabeth neighborhood. They went by Ford Construction Company, which is over on Pecan, right at the railroad track. And they saw this thing laying in the dirt. And they went in and talked to the Ford people, and they said they had saved it when they had cleaned up debris down on Bland Street, which runs off South Tryon Street. And when she told me that, and they saved it and they worked with Park and Rec to get this placed in a monument at Independence Park. If you drive to the very northern end of Greenway Avenue, you even cross Caswell. There's one block that goes from Caswell down to Park Drive that circles Independence Park. You will see the Griffin, which the Park and Rec built this monument and they stuck this baby in here. Well, this caused me to think, well, maybe because I knew Bland Street used to be where the Rudisill gold mine was. I mean, it was very close to there. It was actually on Summit, but Bland Street is very close by. And I said, well, maybe this thing was at the entrance to the Rudisill gold mine, but I didn't know where it came from. And this lady didn't know where this came from either. I mean, nobody knew where they came from.
Right, they weren't sure.
Well, now we had heard that these had been on the Charlotte City Hall that was built in 1890, 1891. Now, I knew all about this City Hall, knew it very well. In fact, the architect was a Swede who came to this country in the 1800s and had an architectural office in Atlanta. And we mentioned him when we talked about the Dilworth neighborhood because he also did the pavilion at Latta Park. You remember at the end of the streetcar line. This was Gottfried Norman. So I knew all that, and I had heard that the Griffins came from the City Hall, and there was some circumstantial evidence that suggested that, because look at this brownstone. This is very, very fine material.
Mm-hmm.
And I had heard that this house was built out of rock that was taken from that 1891 City Hall. But I didn't have any proof. And you know, you never can say anything until you get proof, right?
Right.
Well, let me tell you, Facebook is an amazing thing because there was a member of the Tease family. Now you might remember the Tease family. They
Mm-hmm.
were the Tease house was one of the early houses in Myers Park. Well, the great grandson of Oscar Tease contacted me after he saw the earlier podcast that we did. And he said, I know, and I posted it on Facebook. Did anybody know where this came from? Ba 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 ba.
Okay.
He contacted me and he said that he knew they came from the city hall because his great grandfather built that house in 1925. It was originally, of course, a residence. And I said, well, do you have proof? Well, he said, well, no, it's anecdotal. But he contacted the Carolina room at the library. They blew up. I'll try to not mess this up. I hope I don't. They blew up a picture, and you can see the blooming.
Here's
You
that
can see
Griffin.
there's that Griffin. As a matter of fact, for reasons that I'll tell you in a moment, this is the Griffin that's on that house on Crescent Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I hope I don't mess up here. Okay. Now, so we had proof. So now we have proof. Now we have proof. Now we
Yeah,
have proof.
it
Now,
definitely came from that city hall.
now this I'll show you this next slide. When you have an arch like this,
Mm-hmm.
this is called a spandrel. It's a rectangular piece outside an arch. See the arch, and then this is called spandrel, an architectural term. That's called a spandrel, that space there.
Mm-hmm.
So they were there in the in that spandrel. Now, if you look, you can see this has to have been on the left side
Yep.
because the bird,
No,
lion,
it's not a bird.
griffin, griffin
A
is going this
mythological
way.
creature.
This one was clearly on the right side because you can see it's arched the other way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the issue is Preserve Mecklenburg. People, I tell you, if you care about us doing all this stuff, you got to become a supporter of Preserve Mecklenburg or just hold your peace. People say, oh, isn't that interesting? We need you to be a supporter. But we're working with the owner to come up with a preservation solution. And Mary Dana, tell them the idea that you had that you thought would be really a good way. Do you remember what you thought would be a good way to feature these two Griffins?
Oh, well, I thought that the Griffin on Crescent Avenue needs to be put with its mate at Independence Park, and they should rebuild the wall surrounding the Griffin out of the rock the house is made from. Since they're demolishing the house anyway, they should use that stone.
I understand, and I've got to find this out for sure. I understand that the house isn't going to be torn down right away. It's going to be a couple of years out.
Oh, okay.
And by the way, if anybody would like to be involved in this process, if you will support Preserve Mecklenburg, I'd love to bring you into this process, but you're going to have to support Preserve Mecklenburg, which brings me to my 10 cup deal. All you got to do, folks, is make a tax-deductible donation of $25 or more for a year at preservemec.org/donate. And make sure you email me at danmorrill2@gmail.com and tell me you'd like to be involved in thinking about what to do about the Griffin. Or you can make a check payable to Preserve Mecklenburg and send it to Preserve Mecklenburg, 1031 South Caldwell Street, Suite 200, Charlotte NC 28203. So that's the Griffin story.
I think it's really exciting about that Griffin. And I would also encourage everyone to go by and see the monument at Independence Park. I had not seen it until we drove by there. And it's really impressive. And I think that if you look at it, it's really the entrance to the park. That's where they put it. And when you see it in person, it just naturally occurs to you that, whoa, that Griffin's mate should be there right on the other side. So
they ought to be configured in such a way that one's on the right, put an arch, put one on the right side, one on the left side, and that would be a terrific thing. And that, anyway, so
they're really impressive in person. I think, because we also went down Crescent Avenue and saw the one there, and they're an important part of Charlotte history that should be saved.
What it's all about, it's what it's all about. People say Charlotte's got no history. It's got plenty. Okay.
They shouldn't be cast
Now, let
aside.
me make a couple of disclaimers. I'm not an architectural historian. I don't claim to be. I don't claim to be totally knowledgeable about mid-century modern architecture. I don't claim to be. I think I know enough to be reasonably secure in what I'm going to say. But for heaven's sakes, you can certainly correct me, tell me I made a mistake. I'm not sensitive. So that's my disclaimer. Also, I want to give credit to Susan Mayer, M-A-Y-E-R. Susan, who's on the board of Preserve Mecklenburg, did a mid-century modern survey for the Historic Landmarks Commission when I was the director. She did an excellent job, and I am borrowing heavily from Susan Mayer. So, want to be open all that way. All right, let's start out. These two Charlotte Railroad stations clearly indicate and reveal that a major transformation of architecture occurred in the 20th century. And it basically occurred between the early 20th century and the mid-20th century. The building on the left was built in 1905 by the Southern Railroad. You remember when we were talking about the P&N? We talked about Spanish architecture. Well, the United States took over the construction of the Panama Canal in 1904. Therefore, people were really interested in Spanish culture because the United States was making this major commitment under Teddy Roosevelt to finishing the Panama Canal. And so Spanish revival architecture became very popular. We saw it with C.C. Hook. Now, the architect of this railroad station was a man named Frank Milburn. And if you ever want to see another one that's very similar to it, go to Salisbury. Their Spanish revival, excuse me, get the screen. Their Spanish revival station is still there, built in 1905. Remember I told you that one of the basic dimensions of architecture is revivalist, looking to the past. That's a revivalist, Spanish revival. Now, the Southern Railway built this station in 1962.
Is it in the same location as the old station?
No. This was on West Trade Street. In fact, it was very close to where they're building the new station that's going to be put in place. But it was right there on West Trade Street. Train used to literally block West Trade Street when it came into the station. This one, of course, is up on North Tryon. And this was built in 1962. And this, of course, is mid-century modern. No doubt. I'm going to have to do a little bit more research to get the architect, but it was built in 1962. Now, this next slide, I think, really does show something interesting. These photographs appeared in the Charlotte Observer on the 21st of February, 1963. And they show the old, they're tearing down the old station. And literally what they're doing is yanking down the tower. And this newspaper article over here is really interesting, and I can see the part that's the most important. Because you have to understand that in 1963, which happened to be, by the way, the year that my wife and I moved to Charlotte, although we weren't here by February, we didn't come until July. This was a time when everything was bound up in a hopeful, wonderful concept of the future. And the past was considered to be really inconsequential. In fact, it says here, when the wrecking hammers attacked the smoky walls, meaning the old station, there will be no protest against destruction of a monument to a dead past. Now you can understand why we felt that way about the future in 1963, because the past represented two horrific world wars, which literally killed millions, had such wonderful characters as
Hitler.
Hitler, Mussolini, and the Japanese military imperial structure, and the Great Depression, and of course the Spanish influenza epidemic. And people said, Lord, let's get away from it. We're going to have, and look what it says. And that's what this station represented, the past.
Mm-hmm.
This represented the future. This was bold and imaginative, and there was nothing that had ever been built in Charlotte as far as being a railroad station that looked anything like this. This was totally new, and it says there will be only cheers and a look to the new station as a symbol of the city's progress. So one of the roles of this mid-century modern architecture was to be up to date. And the last thing in the world you wanted to do was keep some old 1905 railroad station around, okay? Now, the most, I guess you'd have to say, influential mid-century modernist was an architect trained at Cornell. His family was from Concord, North Carolina, where he'd grown up. He came to Charlotte in 1939. This is Arthur Gould Odell Jr. I met him. I was relatively young at that time, and to say that he was dismissive of me would be an understatement. But look at these two buildings. This Armory Auditorium, which used to be right at the end of the football field at Memorial Stadium, was the biggest indoor arena in Charlotte when it was built in 1929. This was the Charlotte Armory Auditorium, and the architect was M.R. Marsh, who was a very prominent Charlotte architect. Now you can look at this building and look at these battlements up here, and look at this Coliseum that Odell built in 1955. And you can see, to say that there's a difference, I mean, my goodness. Now that's what we're dealing with here, Mayor Dana. We're dealing with a, see, I don't look, a lot of people will say, which one do you think is prettier? To me, that's a meaningless question. Well, it's not meaningless, but it's not the most important question. These are artifacts. They are expressions of their time. And there's nothing that is any better about one or the other. They're just different. In 1939, even though we were still in the Great Depression, Charlotte had not yet been affected by this whole new concept of what architecture ought to be, and that is to inspire the future. And look what Odell said later about when he came here in 1939. There was nothing here that illustrated the honesty of stone as stone, steel as steel, glass as glass. Everybody was wallowing in the colonial heritage. Now, what he meant was everybody was looking at buildings like that, or looking at buildings like that. And he thought that the future was buildings like that. Okay.
Like the Coliseum, like the new Coliseum.
Which opened in 1955. And I remember going with my father and my mother and my brother in 1955 to a hockey game at the new Coliseum, and I thought that I had truly gone to Disney World. I'd gone to Fantasyland. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this house. Now, the reason I chose this house, I want to talk about traditional architecture.
That's your house.
I know it, and I chose it because I knew I wouldn't offend. I didn't want to take anybody else's house because I didn't want to offend them. Now, I think this is a great house. I don't think there's anything bad about traditional architecture. I think it has its place. And anybody who knows architectural history will immediately identify this as colonial revival. And it was built as a spec house, meaning that it was built before it was sold. And it was built by the John Crosland Company. It was built in 1940. Now, there's no doubt about what the dominant defining architectural feature of this house is. It's the entryway to the door. Because let me give you a little bit of detail about it, because these are architectural features that had been around at least almost 500 years when this house was built. And I'll tell you now, first of all, you've got a broken pediment and urn. You see the black line, see the urn,
Mm-hmm.
See the pedestal. Here's the pediment. A pediment is a decorative element over a doorway or over an opening. Some pediments, I don't think you can see it because of our pictures over here, but some pediments are not broken. They go all the way up and they come all the way down.
Mm-hmm.
By broken, it means there's a gap in here. And here's the urn. Now, you ride through Charlotte, particularly ride through a neighborhood like Eastover or Myers Park, particularly houses that were built in the 20s and the 30s and the early 40s. And just see how many broken pediments and urns you see.
A lot.
You see a bunch, a lot, exactly. Now, you see dental molding. This is dental molding. Gets its name from the fact that it looks like your teeth.
Mm-hmm.
See the dental molding along here and the dental molding up here. Again, those elements of design have been around for centuries. Now you also see that well, let me skip down these are two-dimensional elements, but they're made to look like columns. See here?
Mm-hmm.
Those are called pilasters. And you notice that the way you define a column, you've got Ionic and Corinthian, and then you've got Doric. Well, this is Doric. It's the plain capital up here at the top. Now, I'm saying there's nothing wrong with these at all. I love my house. I think it's great. I think it looks great from the street, and I think it's a terrific house. But there's nothing new about the decorative.
Innovative. There's
There's
nothing
nothing
innovative,
innovative.
right?
The guy who really came up with this was a guy named Andrea Palladio. You can see his years, 1508, 1580. See, there weren't any trained architects until the late 19th century. You didn't have trained architects. Basically, people just learned the trade by being an apprentice, or a lot of times they would just have what was called a copybook. That is a book that would have all these illustrations of decorative detail.
By the way, you've been talking for 30 minutes. You told me to let you know.
Well, I knew I wouldn't go get far, but you find it interesting.
Absolutely, I do.
Okay, so I'm not denigrating that, but there's certain things that drive modernists nuts. You remember one of the words that Gould Odell used was honesty.
Mm-hmm.
Honesty. Now let's talk about honesty. This drives people crazy. One of the things that we have been able to do technologically in the 20th century, we have made major advances in the development of glass production. We can make much bigger pieces of glass, much more malleable pieces of glass than we once could, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is what's called a 6/6 window double hung sash. You count the number of panes, they're really called lights. You count the number of lights up in the upper sash, there's 6, and there's 6 below. So people are always going to refer to this as a 6/6 double hung sash. The reason you had double hung sash was, of course, you needed to open the windows, particularly before the days of air conditioning, so you could get ventilation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in houses now, what they will do, Mary Diana, they don't ever want to open the windows because, it's air
Air
conditioning.
conditioning.
So they'll just make one big piece of glass.
Mm-hmm.
But rather than letting it be one big piece of glass, they sell these snap-in window mutton grills. Now, a mutton are the little sticks that divide the lights. Therefore, the honesty is it's one piece of glass. But people will buy these grills and they'll insert them into the window so that it looks like it's got panes in it. Now, to the modernist, that is dishonest. You ought to be true to the material. Don't try to fake it.
Right. Don't try to turn it into something else.
Make it look like something else. You make it look like what it is. Now, what's your attitude about these snap-in window mutton grills?
I don't like those either.
I had one person, and I don't criticize anybody who said, well, it makes it easier to wash the window.
Well, that is true.
Well, I'm sure it does. But it's not honest. Now, I've shown this picture before. This is a Walgreens, not a very good picture, but it's good enough for our purposes. This is a Walgreens drugstore on Providence Road. You got me?
Mm-hmm.
What's that arrow pointing toward?
A chimney?
What is the purpose of a chimney?
Well, it's for a fireplace to vent the smoke from a fireplace.
Have you been in that Walgreens drugstore?
I have, and I have not seen any fireplaces.
Have you seen a fireplace in there?
No.
Then what does that say about that chimney?
It's dishonest.
It's a fake.
Yeah, it's fake.
Why do they put it up there?
Decoration.
Yeah, but it's because this is what the modernists would say. People have become so accustomed to seeing these 400- and 500-year-old decorative elements that you give them The motto of North Carolina is to be rather than to seem. Well, turn
Hmm.
that around. This is to seem rather than to be. Now,
Well, I guess
this
if
drives modernists nuts.
it fits in with the neighborhood buildings better. Maybe they were trying to be
Well, but
sensitive to
I'm
that.
telling you what the modernists say.
Right.
They say you ought to be honest. I go back to Odell again.
Yeah.
There's nothing here that illustrated the honesty of stone is stone, steel is steel, glass is glass. Everybody was wallowing in the colonial heritage, meaning they're all so tied into Andrea Palladio that they can't accept anything. He still dominates the scene. That's now. Wow.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Now, the Bauhaus was a German school that operated from 1919 until 1933. It was run by two men. The first one to run it was a guy named Walter Gropius. And to architectural historians, to say this is a huge name, it's unbelievable. The second one that ran it was Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Now, a lot of people who are into architectural history will just refer to him as Mies. So if you hear somebody say Mies, they're talking about Ludwig Mies van der Rohe.
No, because that's a kind of a long name.
Well, look, I want two things I want to point out here. It, meaning the Bauhaus, the School of Art. And by the way, it was more than just buildings. They got into furniture and everything. It advocated, now look at it, a unity of modern technology with design. In other words, we have the opportunity because of several developments to build a totally new design because we're technologically able to do it, and we should no longer put snap-in mutton grills in glass. Let the glass speak as the glass, what we can do. Okay. Now, this is a wonderful picture here. Look at most people, when they see this house, they would say, man, that's real contemporary. Look at the car. See the
Right.
car? You see the car?
I do.
Can you see the car?
Yeah, it looks like it's from
In
the
other words,
30s.
whoa! They were doing this stuff in the 1920s.
Where's that house?
It's in Germany. It's not a Charlotte house.
Well, yeah, I mean, I figured
I'm
it was.
trying, how I like to start on the big picture.
Yes.
Okay. So and you can understand that Germany had lost the First World War. And Lord knows, before Hitler came to power in 1933, and by the way, both Walter Gropius and Mies van der Rohe left Germany when Hitler came to power in 1933. They came to the United States, and they had a huge influence on architectural design in the United States. Now, what am I
Oh,
on time
now,
now?
yeah, I was going to say, I think that's about where we need to stop.
I got to finish this one.
Okay.
The only thing I want to say is there was an American who was very, very important in sort of stimulating and giving vent to this idea of a new architecture. And it was Philip Johnson, who was an architect. He also curated a very famous exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City in 1932. And it was all about this new architecture. And look at the house that Philip Johnson built for himself. It's just a glass box.
I was going to say, it's completely
It's a
glass.
glass box. Now, Mary Dana, I will. I hope this hadn't been too academic for him.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting.
I wanted to give you I'm going to get into local stuff. I mean, I'll show you a lot of local stuff next week. But what we're going to be looking at, remember, we are essentially going to be looking at the architecture, that unity of modern technology with design. Because the big thing in the 1950s and 60s was technology was going to save the world.
Right. Leave the past behind.
The dead past.
Right. The
That's
dead
it.
past behind.
Yeah.
Okay, Dad. Well, thanks. And so we'll look forward to seeing some of the houses in Charlotte next week that illustrate this kind of design. So thanks everybody for being with us today. And we hope you'll go by and see the Griffin on Crescent Avenue. That's exciting. And remember to email my dad if you're interested in getting
And
involved in that
support,
project.
preserve Mecklenburg. Come on, people. We want to live in an interesting city.
That's true. So thanks everybody. And we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.